Hi, this is Marty Gold with a commentary on the 2023 Manitoba provincial election. As the dust settles from the leaders' debate, a couple of patterns are obvious. Those who support Wab Kinew see no wrong, and those who have questions about Wab Kinew see lots they don't like. I set aside how the leaders present on camera because being some sort of Hollywood Adonis myself, I have myself struggled at different times with being on camera, whether as an interviewer, a news reporter, a sports announcer, and so I'm sympathetic to people that are uncomfortable on camera. It took me a long time to get over the jitters, and I don't know that Heather Stefanson ever really will. Wab Kinew, with lots of media experience, he comes across a little too self-assured and smug for the taste of many. Stefanson comes across as earnest, but very much more so, based on my observation of the comments, comes across not so much as a politician as much as one person described it, a mom who's president of the PTA. And having had a mom who was president of the PTA, I understand what that means. Dougald Lamont is very animated. And it works two ways. People were surprised by the way he pushed back last night, especially as I record this last night, especially on Wab Kinew. There was 3 occasions where in the course of the questioning back and forth between the leaders, where it came back to Lamont, who said, well, Kinew didn't answer the question. He didn't give a response. And that proved a problem, will prove a problem heading towards Election Day. Lamont, of the 3 leaders, probably improved his standing the most. He was particularly effective in decrying the NDP's record on child poverty back in the Gary Dewar days. In addition, just in general, although some of his ideas are not going to resonate, I think that his purpose was to try to solidify the Liberal vote. They've got no vote in rural Manitoba. There isn't a candidate within hailing distance of any possibility of achieving a seat outside of the city of Winnipeg. His goal, was to try to make sure that the 3 seats that are held, his in St. Boniface, that of Dr. John Gerard in River Heights, and Cindy Lamoureux in Tyndall Park, that those don't slip from their grasp. The polling in particular for Lamont has been pretty close, and my information is that Lamoureux has been getting some resistance at the doors, and that might get worse for her because of the murder that occurred up in her riding in Tyndall Park of a Khalistani terrorist who evidently had been living in Winnipeg since like 2017. This has gotten very little notice in the Winnipeg media. They're completely dumbfounded by this. It's an enormous story internationally for a variety of reasons. This fellow was a bad cat. Not to say that he did anything criminal to Winnipeggers. It appears he was continuing his criminal activities over in India, in the Punjab, and was deemed a wanted and known terrorist, up on many charges when he absconded with the help of 2 police officers giving him fake documentation. And in any event, this might bounce back on Lamoureux because this fellow entered the country under a Trudeau Liberal government, of which her father, who campaigns for her, Kevin Lamoureux, is part of that government. But that didn't come up last night. I don't think the leaders were even aware of it. It would have been interesting if somebody had mentioned the question about how many terrorists of whatever ilk reside in Manitoba. So that may not get a whole lot of traction heading out. But Lamont scored a lot of points last night, and he was particularly effective when Heather Stefanson posed a question to him about Kinew claiming that former Liberal Member of Parliament, Dr. Doug Ailfson, not, I admit, one of my favorite people, Kinew claimed that Ailfson had endorsed Kinew's plan to reopen all these emergency rooms, and Ailfson evidently denied it. Stefanson posing the question to Lamont, how does this reflect on somebody who says that a putative political opponent actually endorses their plan especially for something serious like hospitals? This isn't something like, municipal decoration laws or something. And Lamont very sternly responded that he thought it was reprehensible that a leader would lie in a leader's debate to the province, people of Manitoba, about support for their plan. And Kinew, from that point on, it looked to me, was rattled. And I think he was also surprised that he could be rattled by Dougald Lamont. I think a lot of people underestimate Lamont in some respects. He doesn't always present well in all situations. Sometimes a little stiff. He's a little wordy sometimes. When you engage him personally, and he tried to be more personable last night, he comes across as a reasonable person who may have different points of view and strong points of view about certain things, like, for instance, the landfill, the question of searching the landfill. He comes across like somebody who's a decent human being. The same cannot be said for Wab Kinew. And increasingly, in the closing days of the campaign, the interview that Gordon Sinclair did with his former common-law spouse, meaning Kinew's former common-law spouse, Tara Hart, who was driven into hiding by the abuse of Wab Kinew supporters when word got out that he had once been charged with assaulting her in a domestic dispute, and that the charge had been dropped without her knowledge. Gordon Sinclair, for the Free Press, walked in on Tara Hart, and she recounted her own version of what happened, exactly how Kinew positioned her and threatened to throw her off the 14th floor, 18th floor balcony of their apartment on Hargrave. The mother of his ex corroborated many elements of the story. The charge dropped without Kinew being exonerated and without him ever actually apologizing to her. She told Gordon Sinclair, she felt that he had tried to intimidate her when he called her a few years ago to give her the heads up that the media was looking into his background. So that is starting to make the rounds a bit more. Also making the rounds, I take credit for this, Nahanni Fontaine, Wab Kinew's, you can't really say loyal lieutenant, but she stands by his side. There's certainly been some rivalry between the two. Many people believing she is sharpening her long knives with her fingernails, with her fake nails, if the NDP fails to scale the summit and take the seat of government on October 3rd. Fontaine, now known to have engaged in a totally legal name change back in the 1990s, which came to light when I researched her public record documents and found that during the course of a divorce proceeding, she had changed her name and adopted the last name Fontaine, had changed the spelling of Nahanni and moved Nahanni from her middle name to her first name. The point being, Kevin Klein changed his name. People said, how can he run for office and not tell people he changed his name? Nahanni Fontaine established the precedent, folks. And that was 8 years ago. And the media was silent on it. They never looked into her background. They looked more into Kevin Klein's background in 8 months than they looked into Nahanni Fontaine's background in 8 years. And so you don't hear about her name change. You don't hear about her anti-white, horribly racist comments, her call for a boycott of white businesses in 2007, the things that she said to the Australian socialist movement about the abuses of white society in Canada, and how she does it all for the children, which nobody believes for innocent any more than they believe anything that comes out of Wab Kinew's mouth at this stage, because they're both desperate to gain the seat of power. Kinew's pitch to Liberals last night probably fell flat on a lot of Liberals after Lamont was done slapping him around a little bit, so to speak, on the subject of his healthcare promises and the failures of previous NDP administrations. He's the one that brought up Gary Dewar, Kinew did, which Heather Stefanson also quickly pointed out, well, he's not going to be the premier, make decisions you are. Lamont bravely saying he wasn't part of the Gary Dewar fan club, and frankly, neither am I. So bringing up the name of Dewar may not have worked to Kinew's advantage. I felt that Premier Stefanson could have approached the landfill question differently. And I'll say it here, where if it was me, and I'm not a politician, when Kinew brought up this concept of a landfill search, Prairie Green landfill, to search for the bodies of 2 murdered women, the argument is pretty simple. Well, Wab, Winnipeg's transit service is a little more than $200 million a year. Do you want to spend that much money looking for 2 bodies you're not sure you can find that may have decomposed and expose workers to all sorts of toxins and tremendous psychological duress, which is not mentioned, what kind of grueling, wearing work this kind of forensic dig would be. And I also would have pointed out that's housing for about 6,000 people, $184 million. That's the health care costs for about 90,000 Manitobans. By putting that cost into human terms that people can relate, I feel Heather Stefanson would have been more effective in countering Kinew's contention. And you notice he doesn't put a dollar figure on his promise. He's just trolling for votes among the crowd that believes that there's a moral imperative to search the landfill. Overall, the debate rather, did not seem to do Wab Kinew any big favors. People weren't so crazy about the way he presented. Some individuals believing that he bullied Heather Stefanson and are concerned about his ongoing attitude towards women in the general population, the general public. And so we'll wait and see over the course of the next 9 or so days where the fallout is. But the pundits, the lucky pundits maybe, their point of view, Lamont did well for himself and may have solidified the Liberal vote and could end up holding the balance of power after October 3rd, when the dust settles and the smoke clears in the race to the election, to the ballot box and the results of the election that are upcoming. I'll be back with more commentary, analysis, news, and information about the 2023 Manitoba provincial election here on winnipegtribune.ca very soon.